cost of COVID. In Britain, keeping people employed through furlough payments and small business support during the
existing South Staffordshire line, where HS2 passes underneath near the A38.
To improve efficiency and reliability. Support for mental health. More NHS walk-in centres. Stop sexual exploitation by implementing strict measures to protect vulnerable individuals. Health medication. And also introduce 1% starter mortgages. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you.
I'm just pausing for a moment to work out help. That would be a huge help. I have been timing properly. Is he gone? Simon, where are you? Okay, I'll keep doing. Okay, away we go then. So, Paul Ray, Liberal Democrat Party.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone in the general election. The first point I wanted to say is, I hope I haven't disappointed you. I hope you weren't expecting an Ed Day. I was thinking of skydiving into the cathedral, but I'm just here as I am. So I live in Lichfield. I've been a councillor in Lichfield for 8 years, and I've got family members who live in the district age groups. So that gives me a good understanding of our area, issues affecting all different parts of our population. As a councillor, I have a track record for taking time to deal with residents, whether it's issues about road safety or planning or housing, and getting things done. As a day job, I'm a lawyer. I advise business and I advise public sector organisations on finance, and that gives me a strong understanding of the challenges that are facing our economy at the moment. We would ban the bonuses on the water companies until that is put right, and we would replace the current regulations.
On Thursday, we have the power to make that change, and your vote is powerful, and you can use that vote to look for a difference. You can use that vote to deliver 40,000 more NHS appointments every single week, paid for by taxing non-doms. You can use that vote to reinvigorate our town centres by scrapping business rates and replacing them with something fairer to bring private investment in. You can vote for a plan, not gimmicks, not rhetoric, an actual plan to deal with the crises of the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, and of course the abominable situation that we see in the Channel. When you go to that polling booth on Thursday, please do not think of me. Do not think of anybody sitting or standing on this stage. Please think of the pensioner who is unable to go to a close friend's funeral because they are waiting for an appointment on the NHS and they cannot walk. Please think of the single parent who tonight is choosing to put money in the electricity meter rather than feeding herself. Please think of your children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren. Think of the legacy that you are leaving them. And please choose change. Thank you.
Huge thank you to all of the candidates for that. I'm quite used to looking out at a great sea of people, but I know for some of the candidates it's quite daunting to stand and talk to all of you, and so we are grateful to them for being willing to do so. So we come now to your questions, and the Churches Together team have picked out the 6 questions that most represent what you are wanting to ask the candidates tonight. And what we're going to do is go in reverse order. So Dave will be the first person to answer the question, and then the microphone will go all the way down the table. Dave, you don't have to move because one of our volunteers will run the microphone down to Michael, and the microphone will continue down. When it comes to the second question, we begin there, and so on. So each of the candidates, it will make sense when we come to it, I promise. Each of the candidates will have a chance to do the first answer to each of the questions. Only 2 minutes, candidates, 2 minutes. And again, I shall wave my arm, and I've got a very reliable stopwatch, so I'm going to be very, very strict. So, the first question asked by our audience tonight is this. Shortage of GP appointments, missed cancer targets, huge waiting lists, no NHS dentists. What will you do to fix the crisis in our NHS? Dave Robertson, Labour.
Thank you, Chair. I know I've just mentioned this in my introduction speech, but there are two major issues that we see with the NHS currently. We have the absolute crisis which it is currently experiencing, and the long-term challenges which it faces, which it's currently not set up to deal with. The problem is you can't rebuild a house, you can't remodel a house while it is on fire. You have to deal with one crisis at a time. The Labour Party plan is very, very, very clear. The non-dom tax loophole that still exists is just immoral. It is unfair to taxpayers like you and me who don't get that option. We will close that because we will have to work very hard with identifying and working with staff to be able to deliver those. But the last Labour government got NHS waiting times down to their lowest level in history. We have done it before. We fully intend to do it again. And once we have got a handle on the waiting list crisis, we will then be able to talk with doctors, nurses, patient groups, local authorities, and anybody else that we can think to get around the table about what the 21st century model of the NHS looks like. Thank you.
Michael Fabricant, Conservative.
Right. Well, if I could just correct Dave on one thing, the non-dom loophole, if you like, has already been closed. You're slightly out of date on that. But you are right on another thing. It's not going to be easy to fix. First of all, doctors, GPs don't work 5.5 days a week as they did when I was looking at medicine, involved in it as a student. And I don't blame them, by the way. I mean, one GP I know well just works 3 days a week as a GP. He works 1 day in A&E, and that's it, and that's what he chooses to do. And it's very, very tough being a GP, so I have sympathy. But, you know, things have moved on. First of all, there have been, in just the last year, 50 million extra GP appointments have been made available up to October 2019, which is 44 more appointments per practice per working day. Can I just quickly come on to dentistry? There's a real crisis here in Lichfield and Burntwood. One of the things that we will do is we're saying that all dental students will have to work in the NHS for 5 years when they graduate. They can't go straight into private practice. Look, Wes Streeting, the Labour Shadow Health Secretary, says it's not just money. There has to be a fundamental reform of the NHS. But taking it over as some sort of communist regime or whatever isn't going to work. It needs a root and branch change, and we need to see more appointments being made available. There are now more doctors and more nurses than there have ever been. But people are more demanding, and quite rightly so. And that's one of the reasons why we've made the pharmacy system work, where pharmacists can now prescribe basic prescriptions, which they couldn't do previously, and which previously meant you had to go and see a GP. So there are changes, but it ain't easy.
Richard Howard Riffle.
Okay. I'm going to tell you a story now, which you might not believe. 6 out of every 10 new GPs don't get a job. That's the establishment won't tell you that, because the NHS is not an attractive place to work, And new GPs don't want to go into a practice where they're going to eventually have to be a partner and they can't go into the NHS. So another problem you see with 40,000 new appointments, and having read the Nuffield assessment of the Labour budget, they're asking people to work extra hours and weekends. And this is nurses and doctors who are already suffering from mental strain and are actually dropping out of the NHS because of the workload. And now Labour wants to make them work longer hours and weekends. It's not going to work, and more people are going to leave, and people don't want to go into anything that's linked to the NHS. They'll sooner get the qualification and go and work abroad or work privately. We have to rebuild the NHS to make an attractive place for people to work. Also, the amount of immigration is a burden on the NHS, which they won't tell you. If you don't speak the language, you've got to have 2 appointments. Okay? And when you're talking of literally hundreds of thousands of people coming into the system every year, they are a burden. Another reason why there's a burden, 20% of the population is less active now. We don't exercise. People are putting on weight. They're not living a healthy lifestyle. This diabetes is a massive problem. And all of these things are a burden on the NHS. It's going to be a not a difficult task. It's an impossible task if we carry on as we are.
Peter Longman, Independent.
Well, it's not my specialist area, but I used to run a social care IT business. And I don't know if there's going to be a question about social care, but one of my things about social care is that I do believe we should have a national care service, and that social care should no longer be the responsibility of local authorities. It places far too great a burden on them and actually means that they can't do a lot of what I believe they should do. The second thing is that I believe that the national insurance premium, which I know the Conservative government is trying to reduce, I actually think that's the correct way of funding both the NHS and social care. And I also believe, having lived and worked abroad for quite a number of years in Australia, that a system that actually has for those that can afford it, some notional payment that could actually even be made. I mean, in Australia, you can get appointments any day of the week at almost any time of the day. You pay a very small amount for it. But for those that can afford it, it means that you get access to a much better service. I mean, we pay for prescriptions in England at least, and nobody seems to really complain about it. So it's a kind of an extension of that. I also believe that we could make much more use of virtual appointments, and maybe that was something that happened much more during lockdown. And I also believe that we should enable the workforce in terms of those who are less qualified, nurses, people who can actually look after some lesser issues, to be actually much more involved in the care process and in the NHS than they are currently. It doesn't always have to be a GP that sees every patient. That's my thing.
John Madden. You're right.
Yeah, introduce yourself. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
I'd like to see the Samuel Johnson be more of a bigger walk-in centre for the NHS, and probably a dental facility that you can just walk into the Samuel Johnson. I'd like to see mental health addressed more, that there's more help out there for the carers especially, that they get pay rises because they're very poorly paid. But the NHS in general, I broke 2 teeth on a crumpet. That's what I'm saying. And I'm still waiting to see a dentist. And you can't see a dentist, but that needs seriously addressing. But the Samuel Johnson thing for the local, and Burntwood, to make it more of a walk-in centre that you can just go in and see a GP if you're willing to wait, and to get your teeth sorted as well. Thank you.
Paul Ray, Liberal Democrat.
Thank you. I agree fully with the sentiment of the question about access to GPs. So, as I said at the outset, we have a specific policy. We would make it a legal right to be able to see a GP within a week or 24 hours if it's urgent. And that's easy to say, but we need to have a plan. We needs to be a plan to train 8,000 more GPs so that we can service that. And then NHS dentistry is in crisis, and the contract under which NHS dentists operate needs to be reviewed. And as I said in my opening words, we can't fix the NHS without fixing the care system. In our health service at the moment, there are hundreds of thousands of people who need to be discharged and relieve the pressure on the NHS. But because our care system is not operating, they put that unnecessary pressure on the NHS. So that needs to be resolved, and we need to invest in our care system. We've got some specific policies. One, free personal care for us, and also just pick up on a point that was made earlier. We need to the carers that work in the care industry need to have a proper, decent wage, and we would introduce a higher national minimum wage for the people who work, the carers that work in our really important care industry. But it's not just about money; it is about reform. We need to improve the health of our nation. We need to bring care closer to our community. We need to give our GPs and our pharmacies much more of a role in helping us with our health, rather than the default being having to go to hospital. And we have to be honest about our diet and the food that we eat in this country. We need a policy to tackle that. And finally, a Liberal Democrat value is about working and collaborating together with other parties and other groups. And we can only solve the care system issue if all the parties come together and come up with a long-term, sustainable solution to our care system.
Thank you all very much indeed. And so we come now to the second of our questions. And Paul, you're going to be the first person to answer this. Following Brexit, how close to Europe do you hope to get? Following Brexit, how close to Europe do you hope to get? Paul Ray.
Yes, I think the first thing to say on this is that our economy is struggling. Our economy is not performing. And it has shrunk by 4% since we left the European Union. The Liberal Democrats, as you know, were a very pro-European party. And we cannot fix our economy unless we face up to that reality that we've got to fix our relationship with the European Union. Now, that doesn't mean rejoining. As the Liberal Democrats, we emotionally and we strongly believe that was the wrong decision. But we've got to put a plan in place whereby we can rebuild that relationship. And there are specific measures that can be taken to try and break down some of the barriers which prevent businesses trading into Europe. With organisations like the Erasmus scheme, getting them working again so that they work better for our country. As an example of a barrier, if you are in the chemicals industry, you have to register your chemicals if you trade into Europe with the European chemicals regulator, and now we have one in the UK. So the myth that Brexit was going to bring a reduction in our regulation has actually been the opposite. So we've got to break down those barriers so that we can make it easier for our businesses to trade into Europe. And it's mutual, because we are a very large economy, a successful economy, and Europe wants to trade more successfully with us. So we say, first step, break down those barriers, and then we need to look at addressing and taking measures so that we can join the single market. A single market means that if you've got a business here in the West Midlands and you've got a product and you want to sell it in Lisbon or Paris or Berlin, you can just sell it. There are no restrictions. There are no restrictions on making that trade, and we need to work towards that so that we can rebuild that relationship with the European Union from a trade point of view, which will help rebuild our economy.
Dave Robertson, Labour.
Thank you, Chair. I think whenever you have a discussion about the ties with Europe, it becomes a very emotionally charged atmosphere for a lot of people. And I vividly remember 2019, both in the local elections and the general election, how febrile the atmosphere got and how aggressive people got. I vividly remember somebody screaming in my face at the top of their lungs how I was a traitor to democracy and how dare I turn up at their doors wanting to talk to them about their bin collection. The whole idea of Brexit became really toxic, and it split families, it split communities, it split friendship groups. It was really bad for our society. It was terrible for our economy because the inaction and the difficulties we had between a 2016 vote and eventually leaving led to so much uncertainty for business, led to so much uncertainty for people's travel plans, people's plans with their family, etc., etc. It was a really challenging time. And I fundamentally believe that we really don't need to go picking at that scab. There is a huge amount that we need to do to work with our closest neighbours and work with our potential trade partners, be that in the EU, be that across the world. But we need to make absolutely certain that we are not trying to go back on what was a democratic decision followed by a democratic decision followed by a democratic decision. There is absolutely space that we need to do. There is absolutely renegotiation that we need to do. Boris Johnson's bad deal was a bad deal when it was a bad deal, and it remains so today. And we do want to renegotiate that. We do want to look at how we can reduce the friction at the borders. We do want to look at how we can support the economy, how we can give people more rights to go travel more freely. But we have to make sure that we are doing that without going back into the customs union, going back into the single market, because we really do not need to go back to a situation where Brexit is destroying our society.
Michael Fabricant, Conservative.
Well, Dave and I can certainly agree about the single market, because if we go into the single market, we will have to abide by their rules. But not being in the European Union, we won't have any say in those rules. So we'll get the worst of every world. And just in case you think I'm a professional politician, I just want to mention to those of you who don't know, I used to set up radio and television stations, and I used to build the equipment in the UK, and 48 countries around the world have radio and television stations that I had designed and made the sales to and went over there. So I do know about exporting, and I know what's practical and what isn't practical. Now, Dave says, I'm sorry to keep picking on Dave, but only because I'm following him, that there was some wasted years, as he put it, between 2016 and when we finally... They weren't wasted. We got what everyone said was impossible, and that was a free trade agreement with the European Union. There are no trade barriers as far as import duties or export duties are concerned with our trading with Europe, despite not being in the European Union. But we've also got to bear in mind, and I do want to get closer to Europe, but Michel Barnier has made it clear that unless we join the single market, you're not going to get any closer. And Keir Starmer can say what he likes, but Michel Barnier, the negotiator, has made it absolutely clear the deal is done, that's it, you've got your free trade agreement. But let me also remind you that the European Union, compared to other parts of the world, is in decline. Economically, it is in decline compared to the United States of America and the Pacific Rim. And one of the great joys of Brexit is we've now got treaties with other countries, other free trade agreements that we didn't have before. We're benefiting in that way in so many ways. And I think I would just say one more thing. This country was the first in the world to have a major public vaccine scheme for COVID. That was not possible in the European Union. No country in Europe did anything not to do it.
Peter Lock, oh, sorry, Richard Howard, Reform.
Okay, Brexit. As a Reform Party member, we don't know much about Brexit, as you think. Brexit is obviously one of those emotive issues that people talk about, but it's a low-hanging fruit, and it's talked about by people who don't know what they're talking about, because it's an easy target. I do all of my work outside of the UK. I do no work inside the UK. All of my work is abroad. So I have got a global picture of Brexit. We are, unlike other European countries, we are a commonwealth. And during my travels over the last 20 years around places in Asia and Africa, they were crying out to have free trade agreements with the UK, which we could not have. Fastest growing economy in the world, biggest one, India, the EU, stifled that for 16 years because it threatens them. Now, the world has changed since the 70s and 80s. We now have e-commerce. We can trade like this with a smartphone. We couldn't do that in the 70s and 80s. We can now trade with over 200 countries on our will, on our demands. But that's a threat to the EU. So we're not stopping Brexit, it's the EU. They are stopping it, the powers that be, because they know that other countries in Europe are watching us. We have to be seen to fail, because Italy's ready to go. France is talking about it. Hungary. The EU might collapse very soon. The right-wing parties in Europe are standing up. They're getting traction. So where's the benefit in Brexit for them? There's no real Brexit for us because the governments have not pursued it. We need to have an iron fist and make demands and not be just piecemeal, just using it for sound bites. We are the only party that's going to get Brexit as you wanted it done. Ding.
Peter Longman, Independent.
I always remember the 31st of January 2021 because our Right Honourable MP was cutting the tape on our new office opening at Stowe House on that very day. And what I was also surprised about was, and I actually thought that was a great opportunity to talk to him about the transport ideas, but clearly they didn't get very far. What I was really surprised about, though, was that how little sort of fuss on that day was made of Brexit. You know, there were no riots in the street, there were no great celebrations, it was all very quiet and very dignified. And I think, you know, what's really interesting is that in this election, Brexit has not played a part at all. It has hardly come up in conversation. The Labour Party are not saying they want to reinstate our European Union membership. And I always thought that, you know, it was surprising that David Cameron was so keen on it because he always seemed to come away from any negotiation in Brussels with his tail between his legs. He never seemed to come out with anything. It seemed to be a much more of a duopoly between the sort of Germans and the French. But I love Europe. I mean, I've just come back from Germany, you know, had a great time at the Euros, and everybody was happy, friendly, you know, and just as it should be, even at a football game. So I think our European relations are really important, but we've always had a trade deficit with Europe. You know, we always import far more than we export. So I was never nervous or afraid about the direct impact it was going to have on our trade. And I think as far as border security is concerned, I absolutely agree. You know, we need to have strong borders. We need to do something about the immigration crisis. But I think, you know, Brexit has run its course, and, you know, we need to be, you know, strong and you know, see who we are as a powerful nation in our own right. And as other people have said, that means we've got much stronger negotiating positions with other countries outside of Europe as well.
John Madden, Independent.
All I've got to say is what's happened to Brexit and what's going to happen after next week with Brexit. Could I ask Michael? No. Oh, there. Can't ask you. But my opinion, we're better out, and we've got to stay out. And whoever gets in, they'll probably try and get us to go back in. That's my opinion. Thank you.
You're answering the next question first. Thank you very much. And so we come to the third question, which John is going to be the first person to reply. What are you going to do about the climate crisis? What are you going to do about the climate crisis? John Madden, Independent.
Well, I wouldn't buy a lot of umbrellas, but I'd adapt to the way that the climate is changing. We've already seen it this year with the rain. Globalisation of it with the Chinese and other countries that we're changing so much ourselves with doing away with coal. But I think the emphasis should be starting with the other countries doing more rather than just us with our little bit that we've already done.
Paul Ray, Lib Dem.
Yeah, the climate crisis is a crisis, and we haven't taken it seriously enough, and we need to take it more seriously. And under this government, this Conservative government, the commitment to net zero has gone backwards, and we need to re-engage, and we need to have proper policies that so we're committing towards net zero and making real a fundamental change. So the Conservative Party and Reform, they want to row back on the direction of travel to a cleaner, greener economy. They want to reduce some of the levies that you pay through your energy bill, which are invested in our new energies, in our new energy systems for the future. We must, as Liberal Democrats, we say we must continue to invest them. We have a policy which says that we need to be generating 90% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030. This is urgent, and we need to get on with it, and we need to invest. And it makes sense. It makes sense because it's good for our environment. It's making a real direct impact on our environment. It makes sense because it creates energy security. We've been through a horrendous shock following the Ukraine war with regards to energy. So it gives us energy security if we're making more of our homegrown, in effect, energy. And also it creates quality jobs. If we are investing in the new industries, including the green technology industries. And also, green energy, in the long run, is cheaper. And then it is a big, clear message in helping to solve long-term the cost of living crisis which so many millions of people in this country are facing.
And Dave Robertson, Labour Party.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to struggle to keep this to 2 minutes, but I will do my level best. The climate crisis is real, and it is here. I don't think anybody will have noticed that across the last few years we appear to have a generational weather event every other year. This year, most recently, it was the floods over the winter, which has caused irreparable damage to some farmland around the district and around the constituency, and it has caused untold hardship to some of our arable farmers. It is here, and it needs to be dealt with. The only way we can do that is by cutting the amount of carbon dioxide that human activity is putting into the atmosphere. I'm really proud that I am able to stand here tonight and talk to you guys about GB Energy. GB Energy is going to be a wholly publicly owned company which is going to turbocharge the investment in renewables. Those renewables will not only help us meet our obligations to the climate crisis, they will drive down bills. We can solve two of these crises simultaneously. We can do our bit for climate change, we can drive down the cost of living. It's absolutely essential that we get on top of this. Not just for the immediate crisis, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because this is the industry of the future. We are so lucky in Britain to be so wealthy and to have such great history because we were the first adopters of coal. And that enabled us to industrialise, and it enabled us to do wonderful things. The technology to replace fossil fuels is here. We need to adopt it. We need to be first. We need to get ahead of this, because by doing that, we will create the economy of the future. We will create the good, well-paid jobs that we need to drive our economic growth. We absolutely need GB Energy, and we've got a chance to vote for that on Thursday.
Well, the climate crisis is very real. We see it for ourselves all the time. You know, I said in my introduction that one of the problems with being the MP for the government in power is that you have to defend your record, which is harder than just making promises. So what I'm going to do now is actually defend our record, which is very good. So for example, in 2010, when we took over from the Labour Party, 86% of electricity generation was by 32%, sorry, bear with me, it was coal was 86% was the way we produced electricity. That has now reduced to just 4.4%, which is an incredible reduction since that period, and something we can all be proud of. Also in this country, we have a credible record for energy generation from onshore and offshore wind, which has strengthened our security while also cutting our emissions. In 2022, offshore wind generation accounted for a third of all our renewable energy production. So we've got nothing to be ashamed of on that. But we've also done more simple things. Getting rid of plastics. Plastics are so dangerous to sea animals and through sea animals for us as well, and killing birds. I think you've even seen, I'm afraid, a swan some years ago damaged by netting, of all things, in Stowe Pool. You know, we've brought in legislation so that, for example, supermarkets are now penalized if they sell too many plastic bags. And I hope most of you, like me, use Hessian renewable bags or use bags. Thank you.
Richard Howard, Reform.
Okay. We in the Reform Party, we want to do away with the net zero climate issue. Because we are environmentally aware in this country. We just don't want to be told by people outside this country what we should do and what we should spend. Because what they're asking for monetarily is massive. We can still maintain our own environment in this country. We can still be efficient, we can reduce our waste, etc., etc. We could do that. And as a government, that's what we'd want to do. We just don't want external influences saying, oh, you need to pay us 30 billion for the privilege. Meanwhile, China are building coal power stations every month. Big industrial might of places like Japan, Russia, China, America are polluting this earth, and we are one of the cleanest countries on this planet, so our margins are smaller, and we're being squeezed more to make a difference, because we are a clean country. But they don't tell you this, because Labour's manifesto is going to cost 4.7 billion a year to green solutions. We've got people eating out of food banks. We've got people out of work. We need people actually fixing the NHS. But we're going to spend money on environmental concerns into a pot that we won't see the benefit of. So while foreign influence is still polluting this atmosphere, what can we do as a small country, okay, in terms of the environment? What we're doing now is the right thing. We carry on doing what we do. Reduce your waste, go electric, etc., etc. We're not against that. We can still set ourselves our own targets. It might not be net zero, but it might be 0.01. That would be acceptable, but not to the powers that be who want more money. So, Reform Party, that's the message in terms of our approach to the environment. We look after our own environment, let the globe look after itself, and we save billions doing that.
And Peter Longman, Independent.
So one of the things about Hyperloop, which I'm sure you'll be all very intrigued to know more about, is that it actually is an incredibly environmentally friendly form of transport technology, because it actually uses solar power over the tubes which provide the propulsion for the passenger pods. So it's almost a net zero solution. So it's incredibly low power and therefore much more sustainable. Also, it has a far lower cost of construction. It'd be about a third of the cost of HS2, and we believe that could all be privately funded because it's actually a viable business case with a significant ROI compared to HS2. But also, I'm very interested in Dave's talking about the British Energy Company, because I'm involved and invested in a renewable energy business which produces hydrogen, very clean net zero hydrogen. And the really sad thing about that is that that business looks as though it's going to go overseas because it needs to raise 200 million, and there is no British investors that want to invest in the business. It's all going to end up going overseas because I don't know what the Labour government will be doing about this, but unfortunately so much of our innovation and the great stuff that we do in the UK does not get the support that it needs from government. So I'll be really interested to have a conversation with Dave about that later. I do believe absolutely passionately that we should be doing everything we can to tackle climate change. I, for one, miss out all the snow, really miss the snowy days that we used to have when we were playing in the garden as kids. And, there is something that we can do. But also I believe that it shouldn't be at the cost of the most vulnerable people in society. And, it should be the energy companies that pay levies on their profits to be able to fund some of the changes that are needed.
Thank you, candidates. So we come to question 4, and Peter will be the first person to answer this question. How will the candidates tackle the problems of child poverty? How will the candidates tackle the problems of child poverty? Peter Longman.
Gosh, okay, that's a tricky one. And obviously I had no time to prepare for this one. But I think child poverty is a real issue. I mean, obviously in certain areas, and it shouldn't happen. I think, the government has a responsibility, duty of care to make sure that children do not live in poverty anywhere in the United Kingdom. But also, I think that there has to be a question of, where that money comes from. And, my background was in procurement. I worked in the public sector and the private sector, and my job was to make sure that every penny we spent was, wisely spent, and it was spent, with due care and attention to the best value, the best products, what was going to be reliable, what the supply chain was like, and everything else. So I think when it comes to matters of, public funding of child poverty issues, I think we need to address the issues where they lie most. And I think one of the things that we would do, the royal we, if elected, and with the power to do so, is to raise the threshold on the minimum tax level to 20,000. And I know that is something that Reform Party have also suggested. But I do think taking people out of poverty just by increasing those tax thresholds and increasing people's likelihood or willingness to go to work is a really important thing. And at the same time, I would be quite happy to put in a top rate of tax of 50% for people who are earning 150,000 or more. People who are earning 150,000 could afford to pay 50%. In fact, they can probably negotiate a better deal with their boss to make sure any extra tax, they're going to have it covered by an extra increase in their pay packet. So, we need to do things that we can actually make sense of from a taxation point of view as well.
John Madden, Independent.
It's going to be a short one, I'm afraid, but a lot of it with benefit system. I find that the benefit system for some, paying monthly, they can't manage their household bills with the family. I'd like to see that universal credit would be paid weekly, and that landlords be paid directly from the universal credit rather than them receiving the full amount of money on a monthly basis. There is a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of poverty day in, day out, and I see it around here. We need to do something about it seriously, and I don't think enough has been done to address people that are hitting bad times. And a lot, as I see, is that the universal credit is causing the problem, that they're not getting the correct timing that they receive it, but I believe really they should get it weekly. Thank you.
Paul Ray, Lib Dem.
This is a really serious issue. It's a scandal, really. We're a wealthy country, and when we have so many families, so many children living in poverty, and that is a percentage, and that is a number that is rising. What some specifics that we say should be done. I mentioned at the beginning having a fair taxation system. What that means is you reduce the burden of tax on those families and those households on lower incomes. So you are relieving the tax burden on them and making their life easier. Secondly, our benefit system is cruel. We have the 2-child benefit cap. We have the total benefit cap. And we as a party say they should be scrapped. They are directly impact on child poverty and they should be removed. We are a country that can afford it and a country that should be compassionate. And as Liberal Democrats, we believe fundamentally in education, but also we have a real passion for primary education. Because if a young person comes out of primary school with poor skills and a poor education, what chances are what life chances and opportunities have they got? They are severely damaged. So there's a policy called the pupil premium, which is additional money which goes into primary schools to support disadvantaged youngsters. We would triple that amount so that we give those youngsters from disadvantaged backgrounds, from challenged families, that real start in life so that we can start to take some serious measures to reduce child poverty.
Dave Robertson, Labour.
I'm going to have to be very careful on what I say right now because I am absolutely furious with something that one of the previous contributors has said. Child poverty is not caused by the inability of parents to budget. Child poverty is caused by low pay to parents. That is absolutely an inexcusable thing to say. I had the immense privilege of being a teacher in this country for almost 10 years. And I count those years as some of the most fortunate in my life because I got to work with literally thousands of amazing young people. Unfortunately, I saw too many of them let down. And I saw kids coming to school hungry. I saw kids coming to school hungry and not able to get a lunch and going home hungry. And I saw the insidious effect that that has on their lives and their futures, and this is absolutely unconscionable. I'm absolutely... I can't even find the words, I do apologise. This is something which should always be right at the top of a government's agenda. I'm really proud to stand here and talk about my record on trying to work on this issue as a local councillor. Lichfield Back to School Bank was created by me and the Labour Party in Lichfield 2 years ago. More than one child in every single class in this city went to school this year with uniform that they'd picked up from us. I have always been and always will be an advocate for our minimum wage to absolutely match the actual cost of living. Lichfield District Council is the only council of its type in the region which is an accredited living wage employer because of my argument, because of my urging. Lichfield City Council, since we took over as a new council in May last year, is also going down that road. This is something which absolutely needs urgent attention. It's not a one-size-fits-all, it's not a wave a magic wand, but it is absolutely something that should be at the heart of government because it is insidious and it ruins futures.
Michael Fabricant, Conservative.
Well, I share Dave's anger when there is, as you say, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and yet we still have children living in poverty. So what in practice can you do about it? You can be angry, yes, but what do you actually do in practice? The government has taken action on this in the period between 2022 and 2024. The government's committed a cost of living support package which is worth approximately £3,700 a family. And this includes 2 separate cost of living payments for low-income households. It's how do we get the money down to the households and then down to the children? We're cutting taxes for parents as well. So end the unfairness of child benefit by moving to a household system so that more wealthy parents don't suddenly find they're not getting any money at all simply because one parent is earning more than the other. Instead, the whole total household tax and income will be taken into account. But perhaps the most important thing for young children is to roll out the biggest ever expansion that we're now seeing. It's actually happening as we speak, expansion of childcare. Working parents will get 30 hours of free childcare a week from when their child is 9 months of age. And that's saving eligible families, which frankly are the sort of families we're talking about, £6,900 a year. These are some of the practical things that we're doing to stop it. But we all have a duty. We all have a duty as society. If we've got neighbours in trouble, we need to help them ourselves and also report them to the local council and those who are in a position to help.
Richard Howard Riffle.
Now, parents who look after children, if they can't provide for their children, it's not normally their choice. It's the societal issues that have driven them to do that. So it doesn't have to be focused on the child, it's focused on the reasons why. So we need to support families. We're the only party with a manifesto trying to bind families together because family breakups as units is increasing. More single parents are struggling. And we need to support married parents. So we'll give a tax break to parents. They won't be taxed on the first £25,000 of their earnings if they're in a marriage. That's on top of the tax threshold for earnings if, £20,000. That will take a lot of people out of poverty. They'll have money for children. But also, simple things like the removal of VAT from energy bills. That could be the difference between being able to feed a child this month or not. Every pound matters. Okay, the devil is in the details. So we've got to fix the family breakdowns. We've got to support young mothers. And we have a policy to actually load some of the benefits to focus on children between 1 to 4 years old. And also to encourage young mothers to work from home and be supported. Lots of young mothers can be entrepreneurial, but they can't work because they have to do their childcare. So there's lots of systems in place as a society that we can implement to focus on the parents, then by default we'll be able to support their children. Thank you.
So we come to our fifth question, beg your pardon, of the evening. This is a long one. And Richard, you'll be the first to answer. Approximately 4.4 million people have been drawn into paying tax due to the freeze in personal allowances. What do the candidates propose to do to alleviate the financial pressures on low-income taxpayers as a result of this freeze? Do I need to repeat that? I will do. Approximately 4.4 million people have been drawn into paying tax due to the freeze in personal allowances. What do the candidates propose to do to alleviate the financial pressures on low-income taxpayers as a result of this freeze? Richard Howard.
Well, I think everybody knows about the increase of the tax threshold to £20,000 will save a lot of people a lot of money in terms of being able to work, and their tax will be lessened significantly. But we have lots of savings elsewhere, like I've already mentioned about the no VAT on energy bills. But we also want to bring down duty on fuel, as an example. We also want to basically fix the system where a lot of your money is wasted. The government waste is massive. And if we can fix the issues at the top of the tree, everything that comes down will go into your pockets. but it doesn't filter down to your pockets. So we want to review the benefits scheme. We want people to go from benefits into the workplace. They will earn more than being on benefits. So we try and get more people into the workplace. We also want to initiate efficiencies in councils, in local government, etc., which support you. So we need to make sure that money goes to the people, that you can have a quality of life worth living. And a lot of your tax is being wasted massively. We calculate that £1,300 of your tax disappears each year. So if we can actually fix the problem at the top, you will get the money in your pocket. And we always say, fish rots at the head first. We need to fix the losses at the head, and then we can pass the savings down to you through benefits, but also through tax breaks and incentives and initiatives that will help you. So hopefully you will see that you are a victim of mismanagement by the major parties in the system. We're going to take that money away from the system and give it back to you in a variety of ways. You don't know how the full story is going to pan out yet. Once Nigel is in Parliament, you will.
Peter Longman, Independent.
I mean, 4.4 million people sounds like a huge number to be drawn into paying taxes. And so one presumes that that must relate to quite a large amount of money. So the question is, for that not to happen, where does that money have to come from? And I already said, I would agree with a 20,000 threshold on the minimum amount of tax, or minimum level of income before you pay tax. But at the same time, the money has to come from somewhere. I mean, I think, as I said, my background is in procurement. I'm incredibly conscious of making money go further, and I think there are ways that we can make government and public sector much more efficient. In my business, we made efficiencies of 10% in the entire social care budget for home care, just with a better automated system. I think that the other thing is that we need to look at, care workers. I mean, as I say, that was my sector. Care workers getting a better wage and a better recognition for what they do. It's obviously a vital service to society. But I genuinely think that we have to find ways of raising taxes, not in a way that imposes unfair and unnecessary burdens on those that can least afford it. And I think particularly of shopkeepers in the town centre. I mean, I did do some canvassing there a week or so ago, and I was really saddened about how many people were, either thinking of closing or there were already shops that were closed up. And part of it is the unfair burden of taxes, business rates, etc., that get put on them, and also the unfair competition from the global, multi-billion-dollar multinational companies such as, I don't think I need to tell you the names of them, but I mean, Amazon and people like that pay very, very little in tax. We should, as a country, be getting far more tax from those people. And, we should be maybe reducing VAT on people who are operating small retail outlets, or maybe only taxing them on the profits that they make. If they make any profits, we need to be doing much more to encourage that sector of our society.
John Madden, Independent.
A quick one from me. I'd reduce VAT to 17.5% to make everyday goods more affordable.
Thank you. Paul Ray, Lib Dem.
Thank you. This goes back to a point that I was talking about earlier, which is about fair taxes. We need to have a fair taxation system in this country where it doesn't fall disproportionately on those on lower incomes, and that point has been echoed on this this table this evening. So what does that mean? So, for example, we need to have a proper windfall tax on the oil and the gas companies so that we are alleviating the burden on those lower income families. That's one way of doing it. The Conservative government under Michael Fabricant, they reduced the levy that the banks pay by way of tax. Why was that done? That needs to be restored. And we also say, if you have savings and investments and you get income off that, the amount of tax you pay is less than the tax you pay from your job. We say it's only fair and right that they should be aligned, they should be equalised. So there are some specific things where we need to make our taxation fairer so that it doesn't fall the burden doesn't fall disproportionately on those on lower incomes. And with regards to cost of living generally, we need to have stable mortgage rates. We know what happens when the Conservatives mismanage the economy, when they let it run out of control. And mortgage payments are a really large part of people's month-to-month budget. And we need a responsible government that is going to manage the economy responsibly, which is not what's happened recently. And we need to, with regards to some of those on lower pay in this country, we need to address this. Do you know, if you're an apprentice on the lower rate, that is below the national minimum wage? That is wrong. How can that be happening? And then Peter made the point, and it was the same point I made earlier. In our care system, these are valued members of our society. The pay they receive for their job needs to be raised, and we need to have a specific national minimum wage at a higher rate for those people that work in our really important care industry.
Dave Robertson, Labour Party.
Thanks, Jen. I'm going to start with a bit of an odd request, if I can. Do you mind rereading the question? Because I think there's an important point we need to pick out here.
Approximately 4.4 million people have been drawn into paying tax due to the freeze in personal allowances. What do the candidates propose to do to alleviate the financial pressures on low-income taxpayers as a result of this freeze?
That's two questions. Two very important questions. First question about what's going on with tax, and the second question about how are we supporting families. It's been disappointing to hear everybody go at the first question and miss the second one. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where the public finances are in tatters after 14 years of mismanagement. So the ability for parties to come in and cut tax immediately is very challenging without having to absolutely ride roughshod over our public services. There are some tax increases planned in the Labour manifesto. We stand absolutely behind them because we need to fund those public services because they support the families that we are talking about. What we also need, though, is we need to re-establish the link between work and getting on. Because for far too many people in this country, that link has been broken for far too long. I'm really proud that I am a member and I'm standing on behalf of the party that created the minimum wage. I'm really glad that that minimum wage has increased over time, but I'm really disappointed that we currently have legislation which sets a minimum wage lower than it actually costs to live in the UK. That's just not right. And I'm really proud that within our manifesto, we are saying that we are going to link the living wage, the actual living wage. We're going to change that legislation to link that to the cost of living, because it is immoral for us to say to employers that they can continue to pay people less than they need to live on and rely on the state to pick up the burden and fill in the gaps. We absolutely need to change that. It's something that is quietly transformational and will absolutely get to the heart of supporting those families.
And Michael Fabricant, Conservative.
Well, the living wage actually is linked to the cost of living, so join the real world. I'm delighted that the Labour Party supports that. The personal allowance issue which was raised, it's interesting that the government has actually doubled the personal allowance since 2010, and we currently have the lowest effective tax rate in this country since 1975. And I just want to put the lie, which is constantly repeated by opposition parties, that the British economy is doing badly compared to other countries. It is not. The UK was the fastest growing economy in the G7, faster than Canada, the United States, Italy, Germany, France, and Japan. Instead of talking this country down simply to make a political point, let's actually talk the truth. Inflation in this country, which affects poor people, people who actually are on the living wage. Inflation is now lower in this country than France or Germany, and dare I say, to those who love the European Union, lower than the Eurozone. And economic growth has been upgraded just only today, I think it was, by the ONS. We've got a lot to be proud of in this country. Of course, a conservative government wants to lower taxes. A conservative government, the one thing you can't accuse us of, is a party which likes people paying taxes. But the reality is we went through the shocks, which I mentioned to you when I started speaking at the beginning of this debate, the same shocks that have affected all of Europe and the United States as well, Putin's war, and also, of course, COVID. Bing!
Michael, if you'd keep the microphone, because you're going to answer the next question. So we come now to our last question of the evening. So I'm going to be lenient, because we're doing well for time, and give candidates up to 3 minutes. You don't have to take all 3 minutes, okay? So I shall wave at 2.5, and you have up to 3. It is a philosophical question, because it is this. Oh, I've just lost it, hang on. Okay, the country has lost faith in MPs, as it has in its church leaders, apparently, as well. How can we rebuild trust? The country has lost faith in MPs. How can we rebuild trust? Michael Fabric.
By behaving decently and properly. So I condemn. Thank you. Well, someone shouts resign. You know, I wasn't affected by any of the scandal 14 years ago now over people fiddling their expenses. I think I was one of the few MPs who didn't fiddle his expenses. I'm proud of that. And you should be proud, actually, that Lichfield has an MP who didn't fiddle his expenses. And I'm not against betting. I'm not a betting man, actually. But I'm not against betting. But you don't bet if you have insider knowledge. And that goes whether you know the date of the general election or, in other parties, betting against yourself and saying, you know, I'm going to bet that I'm going to lose. Because I could have influence over that. I could insult you all. But I haven't bet on that, so I won't. It's all about having moral integrity. And, you know, people all think that members of parliament are in it for themselves. They're not. I didn't do the job that I did. I went from a very, very well-paid job setting up radio and television stations, which I told you about, because I wanted to help in Lichfield. I decided to leave the government because I couldn't agree with them on HS2. I was unpopular with David Cameron because I was determined that the people should have a say on whether this country remained in the European Union or not. It's called integrity, and it's called integrity in practice. And only by that can we rebuild trust in our members of parliament and in our society.
You've been incredibly well behaved all evening. Don't lose it, please, in this last section. No heckling, thank you. So, Richard Howard, Reform Party.
Okay. One of the reasons why I stand for reform is to prevent this kind of question coming up in the future. We tend to not like our politicians. We believe that they are telling lies all the time. And I suppose if I'm a politician in training, I should stop answering the question and divert onto something else. Let's talk about Brexit or something else like that. Something that we want to. And you've seen it in the debates. And whether you like him or loathe him, is a bit Marmite, my leader Nigel. One thing that they say is, at least he answers the bloody question. You might not like the answer though, and that's part of the problem. And we're fighting against the system here. And what you don't know behind the scenes, and I've been very busy into late nights, there's a system fighting against us. Because the system does not want Nigel, does not want Richard Tice and others standing in Westminster in opposition. Because you might not like what we say, but we normally back it up with facts. But we're representing you. Many of you don't have a voice. We're just like you. We're just that we volunteered to put our head above the parapet and take the shots. And let me tell you, for somebody 3 months ago who's just like you, drinking in a pub in this constituency, talking politics, politics is not for everybody. Because people are out to get you, even if you've done nothing wrong. But that's the system, you see? So, you want people that you can work shoulder to shoulder with, without being berated. You don't need politicians who are going to ignore your questions and your emails and divert. You want politicians who are accountable. So, guess what we're going to do in reform? It's in our manifesto, in one of our pledges, in our contract with you. We're going to have an anti-corruption unit in Westminster. It's in writing. And it'll be able to have the legal powers to investigate future, but also past scandals. Because don't you really want to know? Of course you want to know. It's your money. We represent you. Should the politicians be accountable to you? But do you feel that we're accountable to you or not? So, in closing, we are going to fix it. Because we talk like you talk. You speak the same language. And we have the same needs that you need. And we're tired of politics in its current form.
Peter Longman, Independent.
I actually think it's probably quite a tough job being a politician. I know they come in for an awful lot of stick, and I know there's a lot of people who think they're a complete waste of time and a joke and everything else. But I think it's a tough job, and I think it's a really important job. And I think one of the really sad things about our society today is how few people actually turn out at general election. I mean, we have turnouts of 60, maybe 70% at most. In Australia, you don't get the choice. Everybody has to vote, or you pay a fine, and most people vote. I think that we need more politicians who are not professional politicians, and one of the things that's great about being an independent candidate is that I don't have to be beholden to party policies or party politics. And although as an independent it's very difficult to have any direct influence on the government decides, you sit at the back, I guess, of the chamber and you listen to what everybody else has to say, and every now and again you get to ask a question. But my belief is that I'm interested in doing this because I'm passionate about the future of our country. I absolutely love our country. And even when I was in Australia, which is a land of milk and honey compared to many, I was always drawn back to the UK because I love our country so much. My great-great-grandfather was a member of the Privy Council. He served when Queen Victoria was on the throne, and I don't know, maybe there's something in my DNA that just makes me feel so passionate about it. But I mean, and I know it's unlikely because none of you have even seen anything about what we're saying apart from what I've said tonight because you haven't had the leaflet. But if I was elected, I would make it my business to form a party and to have people standing in constituencies all around the country at the next election so that we really could make a difference, because I believe there are a lot of people out there who are undecided. They obviously have had enough of 14 years of Tory rule. They're somewhat sceptical or, reluctant to put all of their faith in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Maybe they're going to go reform. Maybe they're going to, try and churn things up a bit. But I believe in a fairer, better society. I believe in one that, we should be looking after those who are less well off, as well as, being able to stimulate growth and prosperity and our economy and be strong and be recognised in the world and have a place in the world stage. I would do that for you if I was your candidate. And I'll tell you what else. If you vote for me and we get our station in HS2 in Lichfield, I will make sure every single person in Lichfield gets a free ride on that train once a year.
We're having accusations of bribery here. John Madden, Independent.
I'd like to see if that the election term, instead of being 5 years, reduced to 3 years. That's all I've got to say. I'm sorry. Well, there you go. But there you go.
Paul Ray, Lib Dem.
I'll tell you one reason why the public have lost faith in MPs is because of this government. Partygate, PPE contracts. It's been a scandal. And we need change, and vote for it next Thursday. And also, one of the reasons people have lost faith is because the government is not working for the things that matter to us and people on a day-to-day basis. Our economy has been mismanaged, and mortgage rates have gone through the roof. You can't see a GP. The school buildings are crumbling. People rely on their government to deliver core public services, and this government is not delivering. We spoke about children in poverty, that percentage increasing. That is not right. And we need change, and we need change badly, and I hope that the next government is going to be ambitious and bold to deliver that. And the other thing, which is why maybe MPs aren't respected as much as they should be, is because our Parliament does not reflect our country. We need proportional representation in this country. Fair votes. So every single vote counts. The turnout for this general election is probably going to be down following the last one, albeit it's one of the most important general elections in a long, long time. And it's not just democracy, it's not just fair votes, it leads to better government. And I'll give you a specific example. We know for the last 20 years, we need to have solved the crisis in our care system to make it sustainable and put a system in place for the long term. If you have proportional representation where parties work together, they then aren't just looking at a 5-year programme, then thinking that maybe we're not going to be in government and then another party comes in and it all changes. You have a mix of parties working together, working on long-term sustainable solutions like solving the care system for the long term for this country. So proportional representation is about fair votes and it's about better government.
And finally, Dave Robertson, Labour Party.
Thank you, Chair. It can't have escaped anybody that trust in politicians is absolute nadir at the minute. And there is a real feeling out there that people are angry with politics. The only way that you rebuild that trust, the only way that you can start to rebuild that relationship that should be there is by stopping breaking promises. There's been far too many of them for 14 years, and what we absolutely need is a government that's going to come in and is going to stick to what they say and is going to make sure that they deliver on what they promise. But that's not the only thing. There was a wonderful guy who was one of the people who taught me how to teach many, many moons ago, a guy called Manish Patel, and I'll edit some of the language in this quote, but one of his favourite things of saying is, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, Dave, that should tell you something. And actually, if you're seeking to be a representative of somebody, it has to start by listening. And it has to start by making sure that you are present and that you are involved in a conversation with people. That's why me and my team have been out across the last 5 weeks speaking to as many people as possible. Tomorrow we expect to go, I think we will just about clear the number of doors knocked being 1/4 of the doors in this constituency. It's not really good enough. I'd like that number to be higher, but it's been 5 weeks and we are trying to get around. That's not the only way you listen to people. You listen to people by going out to events. There's a reason that I was meeting with the NFU the other day and I've been to Citizens Advice this morning and I popped into the food bank where I'm a volunteer, and There is a wonderful community across this constituency, but we absolutely need to listen to their concerns, listen to their issues, and make sure that politics offers them a solution to those. Because if we can't offer a solution to the problems that people are telling us about, what is the point of us? Thank you.
So as our evening draws to an end, can I just say a few thank yous? Thank you to all those who've made this evening possible, to the team from Churches Together in Lichfield, to Canon Gregory Platten and Simon Warburton and the Cathedral staff, to JTV and Lichfield Live, and to each and every one of you for modelling good listening and judicious questioning. Thank you. Oh, there you go. And to all the candidates, we will be praying for you over this next week, and especially next Thursday. We wish you well in all that you do going forward from here. And so simply to misquote the late, great Dave Allen, good night, and may God go with you. Thank you.